Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this morning's meeting of Prosperous Overview and Scrutiny.
Morning, Chairman.
Morning, everyone. On this beautiful sunny day, we should be elsewhere, I think. So we'll move straight on to our agenda today, which is item 1, apologies. Jonathan.
Should we have apologies, Chairman, from Councillor Williams?
Okay, thank you. Are there any other apologies that we know about? No, we appear to be missing Ross Ward as well. Item 2, declarations of interest. Any members got anything to declare? No?
My wife works for a SEN school, if that's worth declaring.
Probably not, but thank you anyway. Philip, keep up.
I work in SEN, as you know, but I work in Derbyshire, so I can't see that it has any effect on Staffordshire.
Thank you. Item 3, which is the minutes of the meeting held on the 7th of June. Are we all in agreement that's a true record? Thank you, David. Seconded, Graham. So we'll go into the bulk of the agenda. Item 4, which is the SEND Accelerated Progress Plan Strategy for Special Provision, and I believe Jonathan Price and officers are coming to present that for us.
Firstly, good morning, everybody, and thank you for inviting us here today to run through this with you. Just wanted to say as well, on a personal note, I know that the majority of the members of this particular group here have a lot of keen interest, knowledge and experience around SEND as well, and that's really good to see within the council. And I've been out with a few of the councillors here as well to some specialist settings. So yeah, I think that's really, really good that we have members here who are fully bought into SEND within the county council, so I thank them for that. I'm also really pleased to be here today to share our strategy for the Enhanced Access Plan Do Review Pathway and Strategy for Special Provision. And I know you all read with interest the consultation documents and look forward to receiving your comments to help inform those developments. Do you want me to get you some water, David? Thank you, Chair. So, our vision is that all children and young people with SEND are given the opportunity to achieve everything they can, and that they are able to engage with the right support at the right time. The developments I'm here to discuss today are to help us achieve this vision. We know that children and young people have a wide range of different needs in the county, and the county is geographically large, and we know that different areas face different challenges. The way schools and education works is also changing, and they are continuing financial pressures for all public sector partners. This is why we have been working with our partners over the last 12 months to develop these strategies to deliver a quality of access to education which meets the individual needs of our children and young people. So the strategy comprises of 2 major components. Firstly, the creation of an additional provision in Staffordshire special schools based on a detailed analysis of need. And secondly, additional pre-statutory support for our mainstream education settings to enhance their graduated response. This will include an enhanced plan do review cycle supported by the developments of an enhanced district inclusion support team that provide mainstream education settings with the resources and support to deliver their graduated response. The support model is based on the principles of proactive early intervention for children and young people, as well as the principle of developing sustainable capacity in our mainstream education settings. So in summary, the fundamental principles of the proposed strategies are to develop capacity in our current special schools to meet the challenges we currently face and enhance the pre-statutory support to mainstream education settings, which will enable them to develop their capability and capacity to ensure that where possible, children and young people are educated within their own local community. So within the pack of background documents, you will have seen the Department for Education's 12-month progress review against our Accelerated Progress Plan, and this recognises the collective determination to improve SEND services, and that overall progress is reassuring. We will continue to report the progress of the Special Provision Strategy as a key work stream within the Accelerated Progress Plan. And I am sure that you have a number of questions and comments, and I'm sure they will prove useful in our continued improvement. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Jonathan. Any members got any questions? Councillor Hutton.
Can I say, having spent quite some time yesterday reading in detail the reports, I think they're excellent. Progress in getting children from who have got SEND issues of any type into mainstream schools, absolutely, totally support. And I think that's, if they can do GCSEs in a special school, there's no reason why they can't do them in a standard school as far as I can see. So, yeah, it's great, and it's a great attitude that the officers are taking in that direction is what I expect to see. So well done.
Any members got any further questions? Councillor Hudson.
Yeah, like Councillor Hutton, I am very impressed with what's going on. The only thing that I worry about, and I've had experience of, is the time it takes from an application to get EHCPs done and funding into schools. It does seem to take a long time to do that. And I am very pro people with special educational needs being in mainstream schools. I think it's good, but in order to staff there, it requires funding, and often it takes a long time to get the funding to the school. So what can we do to improve the delays on that, please?
Thank you for the question. I think there are two things broadly that we're doing in that particular space. In terms of the strategy, the two items that you've had for consideration will absolutely address the timeliness issues that you've alluded to. In fact, the premise of both of the strategies elements are to put the resources in quicker with less delay, and to be more targeted and more accountable in the resources that we're using. In terms of assessments, education, health and care assessments, so the statutory function, I'm grateful to Cabinet members for supporting our request for additional capacity of 13 key workers that are now appointed and will be in post shortly, and the 10 additional education psychologists that at the moment the deficit in education psychology post holders at the moment for the council is the primary cause for delays, and that's reflected in the national picture about the lack of educational psychologists being trained, and a profession that is very quickly retiring as it's an ageing profession. So the strategy will directly address the issues you've made, but also the efforts to increase capacity in the system will also specifically address that.
Thank you. In the report it says in 5 years we've gone from 16,300 to 21,000 children needing that are now in SEND and require EHCPs. Do we know why the jump, firstly, and how is homeschooling affecting those figures?
I'll try to answer your questions. I think we saw a general trend of increasing need pre-COVID, and that trajectory has been there since the Children and Families Act was implemented. It did broaden the scope of SEND as a category, which was right and proper. But we have seen an acceleration as a result of COVID. And my reading of the research coming out more recently is suggesting that we're probably looking at least a 10-year impact of the COVID pandemic on the development of children's cognitive and social well-being. Recent figures around mental health referrals into CAMS have been quite staggering and worrying. The trend was accelerated by COVID. If I understood your question correctly, what was the impact of homeschooling on... I think homeschooling is a result of the increase in need and the challenges that places in the capacity of mainstream schools and special schools to meet that need. And parents are understandably looking at alternative options. For me, the primary option is always school as the first thought, but obviously support parents' legal rights to explore homeschooling.
Yes.
So, yeah, I mean, I speak with our statistical neighbours and lead members from other authorities as well, and I've recently spoken with Somerset, Wiltshire and the one from Dorset as well, and they're all in exactly the same similar position to ourselves. In fact, some cases their numbers are even higher than ours. And just the other point I really wanted to make just quickly as well is that the strategy is about getting those moderate learners supported and taught within the mainstream settings, but there are some children we have that we recognise absolutely require that specialist support, and therefore the special school is absolutely the right place for them as well. Thank you.
Michael.
Thank you, Chair. Could I also thank the team and Cabinet member for the work that's been done here and the satisfactory results from the inspections that have been taking place and the need to take fairly prompt and urgent action to address those. I'm going back to the figure that's quoted here at point 11, that fewer children and young people attend mainstream schools in Staffordshire than elsewhere in the country. And I'm just wondering whether this is the sort of tail end of an earlier policy which has been addressed, and whether this is likely to be improved in future. And also whether in fact there's some kind of effect on mainstream schools in terms of trying to keep their Ofsted their Ofsted inspection results as high as possible, and therefore a deterrent, if you like, on taking school pupils with special needs in large numbers into mainstream schools. I'm just wondering what have been the policy shifts and the kind of attitude shifts in responding to the needs of pupils over the last few years. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll try to address the question from an educational and research perspective rather than a political perspective. It is a statement of fact that we have fewer children in mainstream with an education, health and care plan than the national average. National average is currently at 40%. And in Staffordshire it's just over 30%, and that's been an increasing percentage. Over the last 2 years we've seen an increase in children with an EHCP in mainstream, and that's the trajectory and direction of travel that we will be seeking. But at the same time, it does reflect a very clear picture that our mainstream schools require additional support in order to make mainstream school work for some children who have additional needs. And the aspiration there is for children to thrive in mainstream, not to cope. And I've been challenging that wherever possible. So for me, an increase in that statistical position would demonstrate that children are thriving rather than simply coping in mainstream.
So from a political standpoint, we have some excellent schools in Stafford, and we have Staffordshire, and we have over 400. But there are some incidents, and have been in the past, where not all of our schools have been fully inclusive, and some of that as well is down to the fact that they've required that support or that outreach work from either special schools or the work that we're doing around the strategy here. So that is recognised, and I have to say that our mainstream schools are getting better, and we are there to help and support them go forward with that agenda. Thank you.
Philip?
Yeah, so the school I work in, I know it's in Derbyshire, we had an Ofsted inspection 12 months ago and were graded good. We have a big unit for special educational needs children. We have a hub for nurture children, and we have the alternative provision for the more people that need a bit more support in behavioural areas. We are now striving to go for excellence, so I don't agree that having more SEN children in your school, you should worry about an Ofsted inspection. I think it's something that you can strive to do, and will be very positive.
Michael?
If I may be a little bit more specific, I was thinking more of test results, which are part of the basis on which Ofsted gives their judgment. I was thinking of SATs and things like that.
Well, I would agree with you wholeheartedly. The current agenda around education does make it very challenging for schools to meet the needs of learners who have more complex individual needs, and that does impact on those very discrete measures that are not the whole picture when we're looking at what education means for children. So absolutely, the current direction of travel generally in education is not conducive in a lot of instances to encouraging inclusion in our schools. But what I would say in my experience of our schools in Staffordshire is that they are doing an incredible job in an incredibly difficult context. And the premise of the strategy is to reward inclusion and to cascade good practice from schools that are getting it right into schools that are seeking to get it right, and to provide them with the support. So rather than punish them for a very difficult picture, what we're looking to do is support them to get it right.
David?
Thank you. Are we getting to the stage within education, particularly monitoring performance, and I'm thinking particularly of Ofsted, where new technology and monitoring a child's performance within a school is getting to the point where Ofsted's becoming redundant? I think I've rather gone on before about the Vancouver system where they have distance learning and everything is monitored by a child's performance rather than the child's performance cumulatively becomes the school's performance. It seems to me that Ofsted is redundant.
Well, I couldn't possibly comment on the validity and utility of Ofsted. What I can, well, I'd rather stay within my professional remit here. For me, there is absolutely an imperative to measure impact of intervention for individual children. And for me, as a psychologist, it's always against the child's current performance. So it's the child's performance against their current best that we'd be looking for. And we are exploring a range of methodologies, including AI. Very, very interesting and innovative ways of making sure that we have more valid measures of how a child is performing and how they're responding to intervention. So in terms of monitoring, if we're talking about intervention monitoring, absolutely, there is absolutely a role for a body or an organisation to do that. But from my perspective as head of SEND, I'd want to make sure that we were taking all steps necessary to ensure that resources that were put in place were having an impact, and where they weren't, we were aware of that and modifying our approach.
Well, I couldn't possibly ask you to comment on what's happening with Ofsted, but it seems to me that if one now, with the resources available to us, we are actually able to monitor on a much, much broader platform than Ofsted measures on, that would be something which, out you commenting on the performance of Ofsted, the range of Ofsted work is not as broad as the actual school could provide information on. Am I correct in that assumption?
I think there's always a space for looking at how we can do things better and differently, and I'm very interested to explore any alternative methodologies that colleagues may propose.
Thank you. From a political point of view and more of a personal opinion, I would suggest that there is a place for Ofsted still. The framework itself is not exactly catered up for full inclusion, and I think there are aspects of that that do need to change. I worked previously as a chair of governors at a small primary school of about 300 pupils, And I remember sitting down with the head and we had a long discussion about whether we wanted extremely good figures or whether we were going to be a full inclusive school and give the best possible education to all of our children. And that's the path we took, which was the right path. But it does impact on our figures. However, I know that Ofsted are also looking at inclusion within schools as well and are very keen to make sure that that happens. And that is raised in the Ofsted reports because I receive all the reports for all the schools that have been inspected across Staffordshire. And I still feel at the moment there does need to be some form of governing body to oversee the performance of our schools. I think the two things that do get picked up a lot sometimes within these reports is actually around the quality of education. And the other one as well, which I won't go into detail today, and that's something we're working hard with schools on, and that's around attendance as well. Thank you.
Charlotte, welcome.
Thank you, and sorry for being late. Beyond my control, unfortunately. Maybe we talk about highways later on. Right, okay, so sorry to have missed the introduction. It doesn't surprise me at all that the numbers of EHCPs have gone up massively because parents see this as their guarantee of support for their child and therefore strive to have an EHCP and also annual reviews and to make sure that the school actually delivers on the text of the EHCP. So that doesn't surprise me at all. But what worries me is that you're expecting parents to give you the confidence or rather for them to be confident that schools will deliver without an EHCP, and because you're talking about helping the mainstream without the parents having an EHCP. And my concern is, from some experience, and I won't name the schools, where some academy schools have been very reluctant to have special needs children in the school, and once they are in the school, are very keen to see them leave. And that worries me, first of all. So what measures, and I think they're very limited, does the county employ to ensure that academy schools do not turn their backs on special needs children? And how can we give parents confidence that without an EHCP, they will get the support they need for their child? And of course, some, as indicated in the paper, will go down the independent, or will get the county council to go down the independent route of funding their child in an independent school. And that is the problem. And the issue is we have a number of special schools, but for instance, in my area, Biddulph are still arguing that they should now have a special school because, of course, they used to have one. They used to have Meadows, which was in Biddulph, and is now combined on the Leek High campus in Leek. So there is a swathe of people who feel that unless they have that ability to, one, have a special school, and I think we should be using our special schools much more in terms of helping mainstream address special educational needs, because they are the experts. And, you know, in my days of school governor and everything else, I think it's really important that you have that expertise coming into mainstream schools. But my real concern is that we're expecting parents to have confidence that the county and their schools will deliver for their child without that piece of paper. And I think we have very limited levers to ensure that academies don't dissuade parents from sending their special needs child to the school.
Thank you. I mean, there appear to be several questions in there. I will try and address them as I go through. The first thing to say is that the strategy is in no way a replacement for an education, health and care plan. And if that's your take from the reading of that, I'm more than happy to sit with anyone just to clarify the position. The strategy is about pre-statutory support. It is not a replacement for an education, health and care plan assessment, which is enshrined in law as a right for parents and for schools to request. This is about pre-statutory support. This is about getting ahead of the curve and ensuring that we get the support that a child needs in earlier. In many ways, it will support our endeavours around an education, health and care plan, because we will have better data, better evidence going forward, should an EHCP be required. So just to clarify, this is not a replacement for an education, health and care plan. And I guess what we're saying to parents...
I didn't assume that, but what I'm saying
Right.
is that even though this is a pre-plan, if it is, but parents, in my experience, will still want that piece of paper to assure them that the school will deliver for their child at the right time.
Sure.
That is the point, because actually there's no trust. Trust is the issue here, and if there isn't trust, then they want the piece of paper.
Sure. So what I would say in that regard is that the strategy is very clearly going back to a team around the child model, which is a tried and tested model that we once had in Staffordshire, I understand. So what we're proposing to do within the strategy is to enhance that last period of additional support with professionals, with resource, with structure and with quality assurance. And central to that team around the child is the child and the family. And the model is very clear that the child, the family and the school will work together with professionals through that process. And I would hope that as we come out of a COVID model of virtual working into a more face-to-face model, that trust will rebuild. So trust is, for me, about reconnecting with those that we're working with. In terms of your comments around levers for schools, it is very clear that 20 years ago we had more levers as a local authority in terms of influence in schools. That leverage has reduced significantly with successive policies in the education space. I guess what I would say is that there are many levers that we still have, and that is about the relationship with our settings, and that has been noted by Department for Education and NHS England as an improving picture. So what I would suggest is that I'm optimistic about this. I think that the relationship between schools and the local authority and professionals in a wide range of spaces is ever improving, and I would be using that as the methodology to improve confidence with parents.
Just on the point around educational healthcare plans, there are a lot of children that this strategy will help support and reach that will enable them to have the right support in those earlier years that actually don't require an educational healthcare plan. The problem as well around our educational healthcare plans is that the threshold is particularly low, and we do have families and pupils that if there had been a better support prior to going down an educational healthcare needs assessment, then they would necessarily not have had to have gone down the path of an educational healthcare plan, which they then see as the golden ticket because it allows them to have those additional hours and support within school. But actually, if we caught those children earlier and this strategy does what it should do, that will put us in a much better position to identify those pupils and give them the right support at the right time, which is absolutely what parents want and what is the right thing to do. Educational healthcare plans are always about giving support to those most vulnerable learners that we have out there. Those are the most complex needs. But as you can see from the rising numbers of educational healthcare plans, and Hal will probably correct me now, are we 7,114 at my last check, which I think was last Friday, and are still continuing to rise as well, which is putting a significant pressure on our high needs block and funding. And it isn't about funding. If a child requires educational healthcare plan and that support, then absolutely that's what they need. But there are some extremely low thresholds, and I do feel that at some point that will also need to be addressed.
What are you doing to monitor the response of schools to special needs to ensure that all schools are playing their part in this strategy? Because, you know, whether you like it or not, there will be schools who opt out. And even though you have got limited levers to pull, I think it's really important that the educational community recognises those schools that aren't pulling their weight.
Thank you. Absolutely. Well, we have the methodology already in place, which is the district model. And schools are working very well together currently, and the new strategy builds onto and into the current district model, and the enhancements are within that model so that we have the capacity to deliver. Essentially, the strategy is about schools that are getting it right, outreaching into schools that are looking to get it right. So this is about sharing learning and successes across the piece. And for me, That's a very efficient use of resources, and it also recognises, as a colleague previously said, that our special schools are the experts in this particular space, and some of our mainstream schools have developed expertise and are already doing outreach. The model looks to enhance that and to build on current models of good practice. So particularly around the CDIS model, the outreach enhanced model, we're hoping for bids, and we've had lots of interest from mainstream schools, hoping for bids from groups of schools proposing to be that outreach for their district. In terms of monitoring and engaging with the performance aspects of this, the model implicitly has a performance aspect and impact aspects within it. And we have good data analysis and collection which will show us trends, where it's working, where it's not working so well. And that should build on the current model of good practice, which is the inclusion in schools model that's already being rolled out through the district model. So this is building on current good practice.
Sam?
Yeah, it's just a simple one. At the moment, I see from where I stand that the schools seem to be struggling with supply teachers and having actual regular teachers in place. So how will they be able to ensure that that child that's gone into the mainstream school will still continue with its plan if they're having continued supply teachers?
I'm not sure I can answer that question from a school's recruitment and HR perspective. I think what we're seeing generally, though, is a huge gaps in both, well, we know from listening to the press, education, health, social care in terms of recruitment. And you're right to point out that there are challenges with the recruitment of teachers and also support staff in lots of educational settings. I guess what we're doing is we're making sure that the resource is there if that's required to fund additional posts. But I think the issue of recruitment more generally is a regional and national issue. I'm not sure I've got the answer to that question. Sorry.
Pippa?
Morning. Simple question, potentially. The early years, you mentioned that you were trying to do a bit of identifying them as soon as you could, but if they don't feed into the Sendish referrals from the inclusion hubs and the local management groups, how are we picking them up? Thank you.
Thank you. It is a simple question, and the answer is very simple. The model proposes a 0 to 25 response. So we're working with the current early years model as it stands to see how we can integrate that into the CDIS approach. If we have district hubs of support going out, there is absolutely no reason, given the structure that we've proposed, that the children in the early years settings can not benefit from that.
Are there any further questions from members? No? Okay, guys, thank you very much. And oh, sorry, Jonathan, did you want to come back?
No, I just wanted to say thank you. I think the level of question is excellent, and it always gives me food for thought, and officers as well. And if I could just take the opportunity, please, Chair, as well, to thank Hannah and the team and officers as well, who've done an immensely large piece of work behind the scenes to make sure that we can go forward and deliver this. So thank you.
I think what we like about your reports, Jonathan, is that they're always straight to the point, easy to read, and we understand what's in them. So thank you for that. It is a pleasure to be able to read a report and it flows to the end. So we've got 2 recommendations today to continue to endorse the actions set out in the Accelerated Progress Plan, which I think we all agree is going in the right direction. And the B is to endorse the proposed strategy for special provision and enhanced access plan do review pathway. It's good job I've got my teeth in this morning. Are we happy with both of those recommendations? Are there any more? No? Okay. So that's been moved. Can we have a show of hands, please? Thank you very much. Thank you, Jonathan and team. Thank you. I believe Jonathan's staying with us today. So we'll move straight on to item 5, which is the future highway delivery model functional plans. Now, obviously, Councillor Williams is on holiday, so I don't know what Jonathan's done to draw the short straw this morning, but he's here.
gave it some consideration this morning as to whether I'd like to be here or where David was sunning himself on the beach. There's no contest, but I'm afraid you're stuck with me. Sorry about that. So, thank you again, Chair. So, I'm delivering one of David's papers. I do have fairly extensive knowledge around this, not as knowledgeable as David and perhaps Councillor Pritchard, but what I will do is I will introduce it and then I will hand over to Matt, who will be able to answer the more technical questions around this. So, the Highways Transformation Programme continues to move at a pace. So firstly, the extra 2-year, £30 million investment programme is on the ground now. The £2 million members prioritised pothole repairs programme as well, which starts delivery on the ground later this month. Secondly, the design of the new ways of working is progressing well, including improvements to accelerate the delivery of members' divisional highways programme priorities and procedures to streamline customer service being introduced later this year. The third and equally important element is implementing the new mixed economy functional delivery model. Overview and Scrutiny Committee have been engaged in the design of the HTP since it started in the summer of 2021, including challenging and shaping the new functional delivery model. Today we are bringing 2 case study examples of what the new functional specifications will look like. Our urban and grass cutting functions are both seasonal, topical areas of highway service delivery. And as they're already delivered by a range of different providers, including the Council's delivery partner, Amy, and a mix of different borough, district and parish councils, they offer a good example of the scope and level of detail that needs to be included in a functional specification. The aim today is to present these 2 example functional specifications to Scrutiny Committee and get your views and direction on what works well, what could be improved and anything you think may be missing. I need to be clear though, this is not about challenging, changing or enhancing the current level of service, which is a separate consideration as part of the future rounds of the medium-term financial strategy discussions, but instead it is purely about how we clearly define and measure performance of the contracted level of service. And the second ask is also for committee to consider the method of annual reviewing and approving around 20 separate functional highway specifications each year as of next April. So I'll now hand over to Matt, who will give you a short presentation, and then I look forward to some helpful discussion and questions. Thank you, Chair.
Morning all. Is that working, is it? Yeah, great. So in June, an update was provided to the committee on the Highway Transformation Programme, which included the future functional approach. The committee were asked to consider their role in agreeing the annual functional level service commissioning plans, and at that time, the committee requested opportunity to consider a draft functional plan. Functional plans being developed for each service and activity in phases. Phase 1 includes carriageway, footway, drainage and grass cutting. And if you see the future phases, if you want to see what was included in those, typically it follows the volumes included in the Highway Infrastructure Asset Management Plan, which was approved last year. In section 5 there, you'll see 16 volumes. Future functional plans will broadly follow that sort of structure and layout. Grass cutting is the specification that's been most advanced, and as Councillor Price says, is very relevant at this time of year. And it's included in the appendices as a report as an example of the approach that's being developed for each activity area. The specification has been developed using existing policy, current specification, it captures local practice, and it's been developed in a series of workshops that's been held with our Infrastructure Plus partner involved. Again, to reiterate, these first versions are very much capturing current policy and the as-is. And it's based on a strengthened client commissioning role, which will ensure that the right things are being done, and this will be embedded across the functional leads with clear responsibility. The committee will be familiar with the image on the screen now, and that is this sort of hybrid mixed economy model. And grass cutting is a very good example of a mixed economy delivery. So you'll see delivery function A, which is the strategic partnership, and that is effectively how rural grass cutting is delivered through AME and subcontracted to 2 delivery partners, each based in Staffordshire, and they cover around 14,000 kilometres each year. Urban grass cutting is an example of delivery function E, which is the external provider. So this is principally through the districts, borough and parish councils, and the quite complex arrangements that we have to manage through those delivery partners. And it's a key point that the functional specifications will be equally applicable to all delivery providers and each method of delivery. The specifications will be updated annually, so they'll reflect changes in the transformation and they'll reflect changes in the medium-term financial strategy. And effectively what they do is provide the middle ground between the contract and the payment mechanism. So this approach will provide absolute clarity of what we expect to be delivered in each activity area. It will set clear expectations of our delivery providers, and it also, through an operating plan that will be provided annually, it shows what the contractor will be able to provide clearly to the authority how the activity is to be delivered. And the structure of the functional specifications mirror that of grass cutting, so each of the sections and headings and areas are very much a template for each of the specifications, so you'll see that familiarity through each document. So very quickly, I just wanted to cover the headings included as the template for each specification. So you'll see section 1, that's the employer's requirements, and that's very much an overview of the functional activity, so it just sets out very broadly what the activity area is and what that functional specification covers. Heading 2 is the operational plan, and again this is the latest version of the contractor's annual plan, so this will be reviewed and approved by the functional lead for that delivery area against the specification. And just to give you an idea of what we expect of the contractor in that plan, we expect a proposed method statement, we expect the programme, so we want detail of the programme over the following 12 months, how it's going to be delivered, detail of the plant and equipment's being used, so we've got reassurance that that's being optimised, the health and safety and environmental and quality requirements. We expect to see the training and competency of those people that are working on the contract or involved in the contract arrangement. The subcontract arrangements, if there are any, should be detailed through there, and also the performance management measures. Section 3 is the scope of the service. So this provides a bit more detail from section 1. So this is around the service and the aims of that particular activity. Section 4 is the asset data, a key area. So this starts to set out what system the information is managed in, what the inventory is, how that data flows, how that affects the customer journey and the customer service. So for grass cutting, for example, this might be principally the grass cutting areas and the level and the areas we expect to see cut, and the frequency they're going to be cut at, and also sort of the delivery arrangements for those areas. Section 5 is the service level risk assessment. So this is quite a key area because this sets out what services are going to be provided, but just as importantly, which services aren't provided. So the example for grass cutting may be we cut the rural verge, but we don't do litter pinking, quite simply like that. It also sets out what the risks are associated with non-performance. So it starts to talk about the safety perception, the environmental, and any sort of consequential damage that could be caused to the asset by under-delivery. Section 6 is the payment mechanism, obviously a very contractual part of the document. Section 7 is the risk profile. So this is where risk sits within the contract. So this starts to set out, for example, for grass cutting, if the client decides to change the frequency of grass cutting, where that risk sits within the contract in terms of the client and the provider. Section 8, this is the real meat of the document now. This is the service levels. So this is where we start to talk about description of the works, what we expect to see in the programme, what the competency requirements will be, very, very detailed information around how we, for example, how we manage grass. This might be in terms of length, frequency of cutting, attention, breadth of cutting, grass verges at visibility displays, the real detail. Section 9 is the measures for performance. So effectively the performance measures we're going to apply to that particular activity and contract. Section 10, health, safety and quality. So this sets out the CDM legislation, where the principal designer roles sit and contractor designer roles sit, and around the compliance and governance for the contract as well. And then section 11 is the innovation and improvement plan. So whereas we've set out already that the first phase of documents will set out the as-is, this is where it will start to set out actually what we expect to see delivered in detail over the next year in terms of new delivery and progress against delivery of new arrangements. Examples for grass cutting might be digitising the grass maintenance plans, so we've got a real clear idea of where the verges are, really starting to clearly define where the highway maintainable at public expenses, and so it's starting to move along the sustainability and environmental requirements that we can start and the biodiversity we can bring into the sort of management of that asset. And then what you'll see is a series of annex documents to each strategy and functional plan. And some of those will include plans and CDM requirements. But what we've also started to set out in some of the functional specifications are technical guidance documents. And the technical guidance documents really starts to sort of provide the detail of what we're asking of the contractor and what good looks like for us. So although the specification will talk about very much the detail of what we expect to be provided, this technical guidance takes away any ambiguity as to what we deem to be good delivery. So if we take the example of a carriageway pothole, for example, with pictures and a step-by-step guide, we say, well, actually, this is what good excavation looks like with a picture. This is what good preparation, good application of bond coat, good reinstatement, good compaction, all those sorts of things. So it sets out very, very clearly about what we expect to be delivered and takes all the ambiguity away. And I appreciate that's a bit of a whistle-stop tour of quite a detailed, long document, but I didn't want to sort of just merely repeat what was in the specification, so that we've got time for discussion. And then just respectfully ask the committee to consider the 3 questions that we have brought for consideration. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. I'm just going to take us back to number 9 on the last slide.
Yeah.
On performance management. How are we going to do this? And because I'm sure you'll agree that we've all seen examples of what a bad job looks like, and we see that more than we see a good job, to be fair. So performance management for me has got to be key. How are we going to monitor that and bring all of those people together to get the same result across the county? And how do we know that we're getting value for money? Because as we drive across the county, a grass verge in Tamworth might be cut, but then I see a nice cut one as I approach Stafford, and it looks completely different. So where do we get that continuity of a good job?
Yeah, I think the key to providing performance management in these particular functional plans is that we've got clear ownership and responsibility now. So whereas previously we wouldn't have a single point of contact for performance management issues, we'll clearly define a functional lead. That person will be responsible for the performance management of that particular area or activity, and they will sort of embed that into their governance arrangements, and the governance arrangements will become sort of more sort of client contractor led in effect. So we start to have a clear specification that we can hold providers to account now. And as I say, some of the documents and some of the appendices remove any sort of ambiguity. In terms of continuity, some of the functional activities are easier to attain continuity through. So if we talk about carriageway and footway and reinstatements, that's quite easy to apply that level of continuity. It is more difficult through areas such as grass cutting, where it's almost ongoing, really. So to finish one area, move on to the next, move on to the next. So you're always going to have a lag in delivery from one area to the next. What the specification will start to say is, well, this is the level of service we expect when you carry out the work. And this is how long, or the cycle of sort of grass cutting that we expect to see. So you will still sort of see those sort of disparities where the programme's catching up, but you still should start to see more uniformity in the quality of work that's being carried out in the first instance.
Graham.
Thank you, Chair. Can I suggest a small tweak to how you look at things? So, and this is, I worked this little tweak out with my local engineer, a member of SCC. So, when you get a problem in the road, it's got to be dug up to fix. Sometimes your subcontractors, mentioning Amy in particular, say they can't do this, it's too difficult for them. I think that when they say such a thing, I've got no difficulty with Amy saying they can't do this because maybe they're not good enough to do it or whatever. I've got no difficulty with that. But I think they should have 24 hours to say who's going to do it and when it's going to be fixed. Otherwise, members get streams of angry telephone calls, emails that go to events, and people get up in arms, particularly if floods in roads continue. It's incredibly frustrating for our local engineers, who we totally rely on and we totally trust. I certainly trust my local engineer, great working relationship, and when he gets frustrated, I'm thinking, if you're frustrated, you can imagine what it's like when I have to go and deal with people and say, it's going to be fixed sometime, but I don't know when. So I just think that we should put in to change the contract, saying, if you're not going to do this in the time agreed with our engineer, then you must give us time when somebody else is going to come in, and you've got 24 hours, and we want to know when that's going to happen. I just think that there's so many of these, and I've been told by my engineer that this goes on around the county, that a subcontract backs off, and it's the not being able to tell residents when something's going to be fixed, which is the frustrating thing. If we can give them information, they go, okay, I understand that. Most people are reasonable. 95% of people are very reasonable, and if you can give them, say, look, it's not going to be done until September because we've only got 2 crews who can do this and they're working elsewhere. But you are on the list. I just think that'd be a marvellous thing to add in. It's not done at the moment, so that's my suggestion. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, I fully appreciate the points you're making. I think one of the things that's going to be born out of this functional approach, with having clear sort of responsibilities and clearly defined approach in the specification, will be an improved communication, effectively, and a development of that customer journey. So there's a few things that will inform that. One is that risk will start to be managed more comprehensively from the client side of things. So the areas where in the past things might have been put in the too difficult pile will now be in our control to dedicate and say, well, actually, this is a priority for us now, so you shall do or you shall not do, and we will find someone to do it in another arrangement. The inspection strategies which set out some of those timescales will also be rewritten as part of the sort of process over the next sort of 12 months, so we can start to redefine and define what those response times look like. And I think you'll see through the specifications, when you start to see some of the carriageway and footway ones, that we really start to put the body of the document to hold the client, hold the contractor to account as to what that delivery arrangement will look like. And I'm hopeful that through those sorts of things that we will start to see less of those too difficult box things, whether that be carriageway repairs, potentially grass cutting and some of those areas, and we'll start to move that along a bit quicker than we have done in the past.
Pippa.
Thank you. I'll use grass cutting as an example, if that's okay. Round the district that we look after, we can see that their service levels not being adhered to. And I'm just thinking for next year, we obviously don't want to be back in the same position that the service level's behind. We know that the district's understaffed and can't maintain the workload that they've got. So how do we get that re-evaluated, ready for next year? Because other than us as members complaining, like Graham says, our postbag's full of the issues there, can see that it's not being done to the standard that our residents deserve. How do we flag that up and get that reassessed? And then also using grass cutting as an example, we don't sweep up any of the grass, so it goes back onto the verge, but then it still blows back off and blocks our drains and our gullies, which then causes another problems for the highways team to come out and clear. So
yeah,
it's how are those two groups working together to see if that is actually the best strategy for the verges to be looked after, as an example. Thank you.
Yeah, I think there's an appreciation that we need to work closer with the districts and boroughs, regardless of grass cutting being across all areas, to be honest. And part of that is the communication. Part of that is the digitisation of information, so we're better at sharing information with them and allow them to be better at sharing information with us. So a strengthened inspection function will allow us to be more visible on the network and pick up those sorts of issues earlier. And we're also in a position where we're investing in new software now, which will capture sort of customer perception and customer feedback more quickly and more readily, and with a team of people to sort of analyse that information, start to understand the sort of trends and profiles of issues, not just within grass cutting, but across all areas. And that leads into our sort of management of risk. In terms of the grass cutting function and not collecting grass, it's a common sort of complaint across a lot of authorities. There's a consideration around collecting grass, but it adds, without going into too much detail, it's very resource intensive. So it may be that part of the improvement plan is a consideration for areas of targeted cutting or biodiversity and sustainability, which I know sort of collection of grass verge is sort of, it's very reliant on the collection of grass cuttings to sort of start to embed those sort of wildflower meadows and things like that. So apart from the as-is, it's certainly part of the considerations for the improvement and innovation areas.
Charlotte.
Thank you. The county talks a lot about cooperation with district councils, and I've always found it amazing that one council cuts one bit of grass and another council cuts another bit of grass, and nobody knows which is doing which. And actually, as far as residents are concerned, they just want the grass cut. I just thought, you know, is it beyond the wit of the county and districts to actually agree an arrangement whereby one authority cuts all the grass? I mean, it doesn't seem to make any sense. But secondly, I was very interested in the different types of grass cutting of verges. Fascinating. Nearly 2 years ago now, I think, I asked a question about grass verges and why we couldn't have what they do in many other countries, which is basically to have a metre cut by the carriageway and the rest to be left wild. And I was told in no uncertain terms by the cabinet member, we cut 6 times a year and it's on the website, that's what we do. But I'm glad to see that there appears to be some movement towards innovation and improvement. And can we therefore look forward to other verges being given this sort of treatment whereby a metre is cut? I suggested that a metre should be cut by the carriageway, that a sign or some sort of notice should be put up to say, well, this is why we're doing it, biodiversity, etc. And I think that people are now warming much more to the importance of dealing with climate change and with dealing with greater diversity and wildflowers and so on. I know I've raised it with my local highways officer about perhaps one area which wasn't being cut, why don't we transform that into a sort of wildflower meadow? And got the response to the effect of, it's not just about dropping a packet of seeds, you know, or something to that effect. It just seems to me that we have to change our mindset and look much more at innovation in this respect, not just for rural areas, not just for leek moorlands, but to look at all our verges in terms of why can't it be done that way, rather than, for instance, going along with your cutting in May, June, when most domestic lawn growers would probably think that they wouldn't want to cut their lawns in that time. So are we moving in the right direction? How quickly are we moving in that direction, given that we are signed up to dealing with the climate emergency?
Yeah, I'll briefly answer that. Yes, completely agree with all the points you made about sustainability and the environment and climate change. Yes, it's something to look at that we're considering as part of the innovation and improvement schedule. We're aware of the national guidance through sort of charities like Plant Life and people like that. So it is something we need to consider. It is a project in its own right, because as you point out, it's not about just throwing a pack of seeds. There's all the preparation, there's all the maintenance, there's all the consultation, there's all the planning, there's all digitisation of these areas, there's recording in our system so that we don't do it 1 year and cut it the next, and all these sorts of things. So it is a project in its own right, but it's certainly something that we've had tentative discussions already amongst ourselves and with our Infrastructure Plus partner to start moving forward. But yeah,
come in quickly and say that, you know, how much are we cooperating with local residents groups? Because, you know, there have been stretches of verge where communities have said, you know, we'd like to take some sort of responsibility for this area so that we can make it more beneficial to wildlife, etc. And how much is that going on over the county at the moment?
Sorry, Chair, that's a really, really good topic of discussion, but we're not actually talking today about grass cutting. We're talking about the functional plans for delivery of highway services.
Thank you. I was just about to say that. And if members wish to speak, can you indicate to myself? Because we can't have people just coming in all over the place. Sam.
Thank you. Excuse me, thank you. My question is, I've got a couple of footpaths which I have made David Walters aware of, that where it's not actually on the highway, but it's still owned by Staffordshire County Council. Would that come under the footpath? Because it's full of weeds and I've got old people that live there, sort of thing. So where would that fit into your new service provided?
The service specifications are quite clear when you start to see them borne out about what areas they cover. They're going into a hell of a lot of detail about what is included in each functional activity and how they'll be managed. So non-associated footways that aren't necessarily associated with the carriageway and divergent, for example, are clearly set out in, for example, the footway specification. But you'll see as the specifications start to get on the sort of conveyor belt and start to come off, you'll start to see very clearly what each specification covers, and therefore you'll have a clear point of contact for the functional lead on that specification, and it should make things like those sorts of issues and queries quite quick to sort of align back to what expectation there is in the specification. I don't know if that's answered your question, but probably not now. I can tell by your face now, but yeah, it's probably something to pick up outside the meeting. But yeah.
David.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm not asking you a question about the detail of grass cutting. I'm talking about the functional plans for grass cutting. I'm particularly interested that we are being besieged at the moment, or we're besieged not to cut our grass during May. The problem that raises is that representing a rural division, we have major problems as far as visibility at junctions are concerned. And I don't know whether it's practical to look at the possibility of prioritising junctions to improve the visibility. I'd also be interested within the functional plans about what action we intend to take as far as Japanese knotweed is concerned. And I think particularly where we mow a metre in, the Japanese knotweed comes in the area behind where it comes onto the hedge or whatever sits behind the area that we're cutting. I'm also interested, we had a presentation done by Staffordshire University to this council on the use of reused plastics into filling potholes, and I was led to believe that this council was going to look into the possibility of doing that. I understand that we now have a company in Wales who is actually manufacturing the filling for potholes from waste plastic, and bearing in mind the massive amount of plastic that we have to get rid of, that would be surely something that we ought to be considering. And then the last thing that I would just comment on, when we look at the enormity of the management of our highway network, I understand that the mileage of highways that we are required to manage is equivalent to the distance from Stafford to Marrakesh. And so if we wanted to put that into context, that's a hell of a long way to maintain. Thank you, Jim.
Right. Knotweed and injurious weeds are part of a separate strategy and policy that are being developed at the moment, and will feed into the specifications as part of that process. So there is a programme around injurious weed treatment, and it is being developed to include some of the things, not just knotweed, hogweed, all the other sort of injurious weeds that we have on the network. That will be clearer in one of the following specifications. As I say, if you look at phase 2 of the specifications that will be coming out, there is weed treatment is a separate specification, so you'll start to see that borne out. Plastics in roads, just very briefly, we're aware of plastics in the potential plastics in roads. There are other authorities that we collaborate with through various arrangements who are providing us with technical information around the success or lack of success of these sorts of treatments, including graphite and other sorts of things that people are trying to use in roads to strengthen them, and sort of linear tip approach, I suppose they're called. And then, yes, from Marrakesh, I think the example I've always used is Staffordshire to Cairo, but I think I might adopt the Marrakesh one from now on. That seems more exotic. Yeah, broadly, yes, I think so. Yeah, we've always used the Stafford to Cairo, but yeah, absolutely, it's a really valid point. All the sorts of complexity of the assets that we manage that are going to be borne out through at least 16 specifications in terms of culverts and drainage and carriageways and footways and street furniture. It is a very complex infrastructure that we manage, and as you rightly point out, it's a large infrastructure in terms of the sort of volume to be managing in terms of that inspection, maintenance, and the life cycle planning of these approaches. But yeah, it's absolutely take that on board. But you should see more detail, as I say, through the specifications as they are developed for things like injurious weeds treatment.
I'd just come back on the use of not just plastics, but other materials as well. Bearing in mind that it was said at one stage that this was more expensive to produce than asphalt was. Asphalt has now so massively increased, it must have changed the viability of alternative materials. And so, as a member, I would like to have felt that we were using something which was much greener than asphalt. If we have an opportunity there, I think that we should be looking to explore that more vigorously. And I don't know whether we specify the filling of potholes or whether that's simply done by our contractor. But I think that we ought to have a vigorous view as far as that's concerned. Thank you, Chairman.
Yeah, we develop that through we sit on a specification working group which meets monthly, which considers those sorts of things in combination with the highway laboratory. I'll certainly take back to the specification group to see what the progress is with adopting those sorts of greener materials and greener sort of methods of reinstatement and works.
Philip.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Going back to the grass cutting to start with then, I don't know how practical this would be, but I could do with a map of my area and some indication of who's responsible for cutting which grass, because there's several different types of area that I've got. The other thing is, how do we make, so there are some landowners who have grass verges and have hedges that are overgrown in Utoxeter, but the residents just think it's down to us to cut them all. What are we going to do to enforce that landowners actually play their part and make sure that these hedges are cut back? The other thing is that I totally agree with David about the junctions. So we didn't cut in May. We had the weather in June was such that we had rain and sun, so the grass grew very quickly. And at some important junctures in Utoxeter, it was quite dangerous. And I had quite a few emails from the town council and residents complaining. We did go out and cut it, and it was a significant difference. The other problem that we had then was because we got lots of dry grass lying around, some idiots were trying to set fire to it, so we then got a fire hazard. So I don't know what we could do to address that. So we're just leaving lots of grass about. You know, this was in Stafford Road where they cut. The other thing I have a lot of complaints about is our public footpaths that go through Utoxeter, overgrown trees, hedges. We need to address those. That a lot of people come back to me on that one. And the other thing is, I want to talk about the traffic network mismanagement. At the moment, work processes.
Councillor Hudson, that's nothing to do with this functionality plan we're discussing today. So if you can keep it on topic, that would be great, please.
Okay. Well, I'm just wondering what we do to... so when we do road work repairs, a big complaint I get from residents is that often the repairs are just left with nothing happening on them for 2 or 3 days. What can we do to make sure that I don't think we have a lot of problem with the county things, but it's the people like South Staff Water just leave roads shut, and the residents think it's unnecessary. So it's how they go about repairing. And the other thing that we've got a big thing is about signposting the diversions. There's a big problem in Uttoxeter at the moment, which I think Councillor Atkins has brought up as well, where they're diverting traffic off the A50 through Uttoxeter. It's causing all sorts of problems. So who goes out from our highways to check the diversions are correct? Thank you.
I'll try and address those in terms of the functional specifications that we've sort of developed. In terms of the maps, I couldn't agree more. We have varying levels of information that we have at the moment. Some are paper-based, some are Excel-based, and one of the sort of innovation and improvement activities around grass cutting is to try and capture those into a digitised asset for some of the reasons you stated, including the customer journey and customer engagement, so we can start to include and share this information with districts, boroughs and our stakeholders and residents, so they can actively look onto the website and they should be able to see where the grass is, how frequently it's cut and when it's due to be cut and when it was last cut. So that's part of the customer journey aspect. Hedge cutting back will be part of a strengthened inspection team that will pick these up quicker and process them quicker with landowners to address. And there has been no real directive around no mow may across the county as a whole. I think in some areas it's just how the grass cutting has fell. So because we cut 6 times a year, you tend to get a 5-week gap. So if you get cut in the last week of April, you're not going to get cut until the first week in June. So there's not been a real cross-county directive about no mow may. There is areas of the network that are no mow may, but I think sometimes it just falls on the frequency and the cycle of cutting.
If we get a situation where we do have a health and safety hazard, such like the grass has really grown very high at a junction, is there going to be a function where we can say, this needs addressing pretty quickly, it's an emergency, can we come out within a couple of days to sort it before we have accidents?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's part of the functional lead approach. There are areas of activities at the moment where there's no clear lead, and what that leads to is a number of different answers coming from a number of different people, effectively. So where you have those concerns in the future, it'll be very clearly signposted as to who the person is that you need to speak to, and they'll be clearly empowered to move that along and provide an answer quite quickly. So it'll be about the point of inquiry will be a lot clearer for you, I think.
And if I can just point out any areas of concern where we feel that, like on an island where the grass is too high that you can't see around it, that can all be reported on the My Staff's app through the reported system, and whoever is responsible will then be picked up because Staffordshire County will get it to the right person. So that's all of our responsibilities to ensure that there are no obstructions and safety issues. Bernard.
Thank you, Chairman. I think you realise that the A460 in South Staffordshire, down by Featherstone, the amount of hold-ups that we're having there is absolutely fantastic, in as much as nobody's got anywhere to go because there's just the one route. And so therefore the traffic just trails back and back and back, affecting other areas which they shouldn't affect. For instance, if you take the fact that Shares Hill, every road in Shares Hill in the village was actually taken up by cars coming off the A460 trying to find a way through, whereby in front of my house, which is like a back lane, for 2 hours there was cars just parked on the road because they had nowhere to go. Because all they did, they came off the A460 and they've got to go back onto the A460, and all my road does, it takes it off, then brings it back onto the A460. So they had nowhere to go. The big problem that we're going to have as far as the A460 is concerned, isn't so much where the link road is going to come in, but really it's where the island on the M6 junction 11 is, particularly even when the link road gets built, because the hold-ups on that island can be tremendous as well, and that's due to the lights. Such a short amount of time for people to be able to get on the island and get round the island.
Councillor Williams, again,
What I'm asking, Chair.
This is nothing to do with what we're discussing now, the functionality plan. This is a highways issue that you need to take up outside of this meeting.
Well, I'm just trying to find out, Chair, is how we can start to overcome this before the problem arises when the new road is built.
Councillor Hudson, did you want to ask a question? Hutton, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. Mine's about grass cutting. People go on about wildflowers. The type of grass cutting we do, we mulch. We cut grass and leave the grass there, whether it's in the countryside or in the towns. You can't have a wildflower meadow if you mulch. That's just the way life is. You've got to clear all the grass, because wildflower meadows, farmers use sheep to keep it. And I don't understand why we're even thinking about wildflowers when we do not have the capability of cutting. The expense it would add to our grass cutting services would take money from elsewhere. I just think that we should be putting this to bed, that we are not in the business of creating wildflower meadows. Thank you.
Yeah, I think part of the project that's looking at sort of biodiversity and sustainability, one part of those considerations is wildflower meadows, and as you rightly stated, as you rightly point out, they are resource intensive and cost intensive to sort of implement, and it might be a case of ruling them in, ruling them out, or being more targeted with the approach, and that could mean community involvement and things like that. So it'd be part of the project that's born out as part of the innovation and improvement plan. But yeah, by no means are we sort of saying we're going to be having wildflower meadows situated all along the highway in Staffordshire. But
Thank you. Are there any further questions or comments for poor Matt sat at the back? Well done, Matt. I think you've done extremely well today, and thank you, Jonathan, as well. I know it's not your area of expertise, but you've done extremely well with the questioning. We've got 3 recommendations this morning, and I think we've covered them all. Comment on the approach being taken, comment on the format and content headings, and consider how scrutiny inputs into the functional level service commissioning plans. I think everyone's had a chance to do that. So if we are in agreement with those 3 recommendations, thank you. Can we have a show of hands, please? That's brilliant. Both hands from Graham. Thank you very much. Matt, I think you're free to go if you want. And we move on to the next item, which is Staffordshire bus strategy. Poor Jonathan, it's you again.
No, poor you guys having to put up with me, so I apologise for that. Bus strategy actually really important, particularly within the education and SEND's portfolio, as well as the SEND transport budget is overspent, and we do put a lot of pupils on mainstream bus services to not only support those services, but also it's a greener thing to do as well. So it's really important that we get this right. So during 2022 and 23, local buses in Staffordshire carried about 8.3 million adult passenger journeys, making the bus our most important means of public transport. However, the bus network in Staffordshire has seen a notable decline in patronage over the preceding decade, from 22 million passenger journeys in 2009-2010 to pre-pandemic levels of 12.6 million passengers in 2019-2020. And I stress this point, although the County Council does not run buses, The authority has a role in shaping public transport provision in Staffordshire, acting in its role as the local transport authority. So the role of the authority is one of coordination, and operators must also undertake activities to develop the Staffordshire bus network. An enhanced partnership is a formal agreement between the local authority and bus operators, setting out what is expected of each party and the standards that will be met. Such a partnership will further demonstrate to the Department for Transport that there is a clear and agreed plan for any funding applications within Staffordshire, the result of which will ensure the bidding process is easier and that we will be in a better position than those local authorities without an enhanced partnership. The Staffordshire Bus Service Improvement Plan was developed in partnership with the public bus providers operating in Staffordshire to deliver outcomes, which was shaped by a public engagement exercise and from comments from yourselves at the Prosperous Overview and Scrutiny Committee at the meeting which was held here on the 16th of September 2021. The financial ask of the Bus Service Improvement Plan to the Department for Transport was for 113 million. However, the Staffordshire Bus Service Improvement Plan bid was unsuccessful. A full review of the existing Bus Service Improvement Plan is required based on feedback received from the Department for Transport, and a revised Bus Service Improvement Plan for Staffordshire would have a wide-ranging benefit for our urban and rural areas alike. A high-quality and sustainable bus network could support Staffordshire economy by providing access to employment, education, as mentioned earlier, and training opportunities, and increasing footfall, of course, in our town centres. A more reliable network could also encourage regular and new users to consider public transport as a preferred travel option, and hopefully that would then increase numbers on this transport. An ambitious, enhanced partnership and bus service improvement plan should help to encourage the development of a sustainable bus network that will play an invaluable role in our strategic plan, providing equality of access to employment and key services, and contributing, of course, towards our achieving carbon net zero. It offers the opportunity to reverse the long-term decline in bus passenger numbers that have occurred over the past decade, and through robust measures, a public transport network set on a strong and sustainable footing can therefore be restored. So I recommend to this committee that they consider and provide comments on the proposals to complete the process for the creation of an enhanced partnership, and undertake a full review of the previously agreed bus service improvement plan in advance of a recommendation to the County Council Cabinet. And I just wanted to welcome officers here as well today this morning who will be able to provide answers to any technical questions that you may have. Thank you.
David?
Thank you, Chairman. If I look at item 4 on the report, although the County Council does not run buses, the authority has a role in shaping public transport provision. I can well understand when you look at the urban areas that we seem to have buses zipping all over the place and doing a very good job in what they're doing. If you look in Lichfield, for example, the bus station there seems to be extremely busy. But if we then look at the villages where the demand for buses may just be 1 or 2 people, I wonder whether the strategy that we're operating for the application of buses wouldn't be better served by maybe a ring and ride service or something as an alternative service to the way we currently run buses. I'm not saying ring and ride is the answer. I'm just asking really, have we considered alternative strategies for how we serve the villages? Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you for the question. I think what the paper and what the strategy is about is really, it's not that we're suggesting that buses are the sustainable public transport option for all areas of the county, but when it is possible and there's grant funding available, then we should maximise that grant funding and make it viable. Other areas of the county, we've got a team now following a restructure where we look at local bus services but community transport, and that's where those demand responsive transport options are being looked at as well. So it's, there's buses and there's a wide range of public transport options that we are exploring
across the county. We're not just saying that buses are the only solution in Staffordshire.
Graham?
Thank you, Chair. There's been a number of cuts in transport services in urban areas recently, and First and D&G are the two big operators in the north of Staffordshire, and they say it's not viable to run some of these services. And one of the things that is cited is the fact that it tends to be elderly people using these services during the day, and they're on free bus passes provided by the county. So in fact, free bus passes are working against having a sustainable bus network. Is one of the things that they're suggesting. They've suggested this could be a problem. I was wondering, have the county considered the effect of free bus passes on the current network falling? Thank you.
Thank you. First thing to say is that the concessionary scheme is a government-led scheme nationally, so the rules are there, we have to provide it. In terms of the effect of COVID, the concession holders are not coming back in the numbers other bus passengers are. They are 30 to 40% down across the board all around the country. So that is having a massive impact. And yes, the amount of revenue a bus company gets for a concession pass holder paid by us is a lot less than if they paid the cash fare. I should tell you, just before I joined the county council, I spent 5 years as a director of a bus company in Staffordshire, so I'm very familiar with all these operational things. I think the other issue which they're not touching on there is their costs have increased. You know, in the last 12 months, driver costs are up 30%, fuel's up 20%, overheads are up 30%. So routes that were previously viable, if you couple up both the loss of revenue, so from the 5 to 10% of paying passengers and 30% of concessions who aren't back, and the cost of overheads, that's what's hitting it. And yeah, in urban areas, yeah, we have had some first cutbacks, and we've stepped in as a county council where we can, but obviously we need to get value for money, because some of the figures that we were provided to maintain the service were going to cost us £4 or £5 per passenger journey just to subsidise the route. So we've had to look for alternatives, whether it's less frequency or slightly different routes or whatever, to get better value for money.
John, is it worth mentioning why those numbers are not coming back on the service?
There's a lot of investigation going on. There's a group called Transport Focus, who are a national bus user representative organisation, who are still trying to fathom out why. There's been a decline in training concessions for many years, well pre-COVID, because as the pension age is increasing, so you aren't getting the people coming in the bottom entitled to their bus passes in the same number. And although people are living longer, the sort of top end, when they're living in nursing homes and with care and that sort of thing, they're not using buses. So there is a general drop-off. There's also a feeling that a lot of it is about behaviour. People have got used to not going out. Whereas they used to go into town and meet Mabel every Tuesday, they don't now. They talk to them on the phone or whatever, and they don't go to town. So it's a lot of it is behaviour. And it's a difficult one, because although there's the talk that bus companies should do more to attract passengers, if you're struggling to attract people who get a service for free, it's a very difficult thing to try and market. You can't cut prices or anything on it. It is difficult. But yeah, that's the basic reason why concessions are dropping off.
Charlotte?
Well, I was going to come in on first as well, but it's not just older people. For some students, they can't get to Leek High on time because they don't have a seat on the school bus, the vacant seat scheme, and there aren't buses to get them to school on time, so they're constantly at least a quarter of an hour late. So that is a concern. But this enhanced partnership seems to be driven more by the threat of the DFT taking funds off the county council than any real enthusiasm to build any sort of increased usage of buses. Now, clearly, it's not just villages that rely on buses. A whole range of reasons why people don't drive or can't drive, and that's why it's so important. I mean, when I was working in the DFT, everyone was very excited by trains, but actually buses are by far the more important means of public transport than train, certainly in Staffordshire and certainly in the Staffordshire Moorlands. So this strategy, I think I read somewhere, only looks to increase usage by, is it 5%, which is tiny and basically does not even keep up with the decline in patronage. And so this seems to me a partnership which is going nowhere unless you can convince me that you're working with other local authorities to make this a far greater partnership across at least the sub-region.
Yeah, thank you. Well, firstly, to answer the question on cooperation, we are invited to the Stoke Enhanced Partnership into their forum as a neighbouring authority. They're the ones we interact with the most. We do talk to other authorities, particularly the West Midlands Combined Authority, although they have a slightly different system there. In terms of a target, yes, it's not massively ambitious, but it doesn't mean we have to stop at 5%. But it's all about funding. At the end of the day, bus companies aren't going to run loss-making routes. The money has to come from somewhere to make it fundable. We have a budget. The idea of rewriting the BSIT following the Department for Transport feedback is that we want to build a future bid for money when it's available. If they decide to release a pot of money for something, then we want to have a good chance of getting it. And yeah, the idea of an enhanced partnership is that we work together, because previously there's been very much a sort of, I wouldn't say a them and us, but you just don't feel there's the gelling. You know, the bus companies, they've got to make money. They've got shareholders. We have to accept that, you know. They're not a charity. But at the same time, we've got to get value for money for our taxpayers. So it is a bit of a juggling job.
Any indication of why the bus service improvement plan put forward by Staffordshire was unsuccessful? Have you had feedback from the DFT? Maybe you'd like to share that with us. Yeah,
one word answer is yes. I spent half a day with them, or near enough half a day with them, going through it in detail. They liked a lot of what was in our plan, but they said it lacked specific detail. So we talked about introducing key corridors, but didn't specify what they were, for example. I have to say this is all written before my time, so this is something I've picked up. And they also thought that there wasn't the joined up link between what we said were the issues and what we said were the fixes, if that makes sense. We didn't show it within the plan. So in summary, they said, yeah, lots of good ideas, but you lack detail in it. And as such, they wouldn't actually be able to pinpoint and say what they would get if they gave us the money. That's why we need to rewrite it, because what they did make very clear was if you don't rewrite it, you won't get future money, because it's not a case of next time money's released, it will go to those who didn't get it the first time. It's a case of you've got to prove to us again, and it is an ongoing thing.
Sam?
Thank you. The idea of you talking to the bus companies and the bus companies talking to Staffordshire County Council, I think is a good one. Do you consider speaking to the local member as well? So if you have an area that's losing a bus, do you speak to the local member as in to say, how's this going to affect our residents? Do you have any feedback on that? Because when we have highways, they come back to us and they say, right, we've got a road closure coming in. Who's it going to affect? Is there something that you could do that way? I know we had an incident in Norton Keynes where they just stopped the bus. They just literally, but highways, because, not highways, county, because we got you involved. The 106 money, I think it was used to pay for that bus to run through that system, although the route changed a little bit. Is it something that you could perhaps get involved with, like the parish council, the district council, the local members, just to ask them their advice, what they think?
Well, yeah, it's a good question, and the simple answer is ideally yes. The constraint we have is that bus companies are only required to give us 10 weeks' notice of any change, and we don't. Although we can object, we have to object on statutory grounds if we do. So, if, for instance, they're changing a route but their timing points are more than 15 minutes apart, we can object because that's a statutory requirement. They have the right to do anything with anything commercial. So yeah, with the clock ticking, it's very, very difficult to get things done, because by the time we come up with a solution, is another bus company going to be able to step in and do it in that time and recruit the drivers and everything? Probably not. So we have to be very quick off the mark. What I'm hoping is that with the EP and talking regularly, we will know the issues before they become up to the point of we're taking this bus off. You know, and that's what I'm trying to encourage. I actively go out to all the large operators every couple of months and see them and have a very general chat as well as any specifics. I prefer to go and see them simply because that's when you get all the other information that's not on an agenda to talk to. And you actually understand what their issues are before they start to hit.
Sam's question though was about actually are we communicating any future bus closures or loss of routes? I think that's a really good question.
It's something that we need to be doing better is an honest answer.
Thank you. I just think with the people on the ground, like I say, myself, there's the district, there's the parish council, they're all aware of the bus routes. Our parish council in Heath Hayes tends to get a lot of complaints that we can't deal with, but can be dealt with higher up because it's highways, county, district, etc. So to me, that's somebody you should be speaking to if you're aware of that bus route coming off. You contact the parish, the district, or the county council member.
I agree with you, but it needs to be a two-way street because I've not been made aware of it by any of the parish councils of any issues. So it's not coming up to us either.
I'm not getting at you. I'm just saying, is it something that you could build into your works where you're saying on number 4 that you know and the bus company know, but how's it going to affect the local people?
Richard wants to come in on this one.
Yep.
I think you're absolutely right. I think we need to have that prior knowledge and understanding of what the changes are ahead of schedule, and then we can relay that back to the district parishes and members to get their understanding, make them aware before your mailbags are full of complaints and you have a full appraisal of what's happened, why those decisions have been made, why we were unable to get a substitute company to come in to do the service, why we were unable to subsidise it because of the value for money and things like that. So we can provide you with that information. But yeah, improved communications is something we can take away and look at.
Just ask one quick question. Going back to what David said about buses and getting like the people to different types of buses, can the bus companies not buy smaller buses rather than the bigger buses? Because they're having less people on those buses, is it not?
They tend to operate the size of bus they need to. A lot of our routes have sort of one peak run in the morning and the afternoon which carry school children. In some cases actually on a dedicated route separately because that's what pays for it, makes the whole operation viable. So if they have to carry 40 children in the morning, it will cost them too much to then swap it for a little bus because you've got a whole capital outlay of 2 buses then. So yeah, they do tend to run the smallest bus they can because that's obviously makes sense. But the biggest cost with running a bus is the driver as well. So you know, the cost savings aren't that great.
I was just going to come in there on the back of what Sam's just said. Surely we should be creating competition because at the moment we've got certain bus companies that monopolise the market and there's no competition. And I'm in agreement with Sam. If there's a smaller area like David in the villages, we don't want a great big massive double-decker bus going through there. We want a smaller bus that's going to be able to navigate the bends all the way up, especially where David lives, because it's like a hairpin bend. And also, what are we doing to ensure that our bus services are sustainable going forward? When are they moving to electric? You know, we've got buses trundling around, and I was at the outside the assembly rooms in Tamworth yesterday, and an 08 bus was there with its engine still on, waiting for people to board, chucking out toxic fumes where the doors were open to a cafe, and when I asked him to turn his engine off while he was stationary. So surely we should be encouraging our bus operators to become more environmental friendly as well.
As part of the County Council's successful Luff 2 bid, there will be 6 electric buses for Staffordshire. So they'll be the first ones within the county. So that we'll be utilising them with 3 different operators, utilising 3 major corridors of Staffordshire County Council. They'll be the first ones, but ultimately it's back down to the cost of the vehicles, and I'll let John detail those figures.
Yeah, an electric bus costs somewhere between 2 and 3 times the cost of the diesel equivalent. And the bus companies aren't making the money at present to justify this. Plus, you've got to buy all the infrastructure to actually charge it as well. That's the biggest handicap to it. In terms of diesel engines running, they are encouraged to switch them off if they're sitting for any length of time. But the problem is when you do that, the heating goes off in the bus, the air conditioning goes off, and quite a lot of the electrics go off. So if it's a short sit, it's actually better to keep it on for the point of the environment of passengers sitting on the bus. But yeah, they are encouraged to, because obviously it saves fuel. Yes, I'd love to have a fleet of electric buses, and part of the BSIP talks about electric buses and the costings of those and where we'd like to see them, or will do, shall I say, on the rewrite. It mentioned it in there, but again, it lacked the detail behind it. But yes, a big driver, definitely.
And you mentioned about the cost of fuel. I drive an electric vehicle and I got my money back within 6 months. You know, we've got to look, we can't look at the now, we've got to look at the future. And we need to protect the people that are using that service, the people that are standing around waiting for that service, and all of us using the town centres where these buses tend to pull in. So I think, yes, the cost is more, but in the long run, you get better value for money.
Yeah, if I can just answer that, a new electric bus is £400,000, £500,000. If you think a concessionary pass, they get paid about £1.15, £1.20, depending on whether exactly which authority they're operating, whether it's us or someone else. And they've got to take their costs out of that. It is a lot of money to invest up front. And these companies simply don't have it. We've got 6 major operators in Staffordshire, plus a number of much smaller ones. Several of those are privately owned. So it would be, they're not down to shareholders, they're down to an individual who owns them, or more than one individual. The others are down to shareholders they've got to answer to. And it is simply, it's not an industry to make money in at present. I mean, I don't know whether anyone's ever met Julian Peddle. He's the managing director of, yeah, you have, yeah. I asked him, he used to be fellow director to me at Midland Classic. I asked him the question, two questions. Knowing what you know now, would you have got into the bus industry when you did? And he said, yes. I said, and if you were setting out now, would you go into the bus industry? And bear in mind, he's made millions out of this. He said, absolutely not. So that's where the bus industry is. It's not making money. And it's a bigger problem than Staffordshire can deal with. It's a much bigger problem. As an honest opinion, I see the bus industry going one of 2 ways, and this will be politically driven by London rather than anything else. Either it's going to contract quite dramatically into a commercial operation with only what's really viable, and everything else will have to live without it, or it's going to become a properly funded, socially driven operation and a service, again, rather than a business. And I would rather see the latter. The enhanced partnership, which obviously we're pushing for, and the BSIP will take us somewhere towards that direction. But long term, it needs more funding.
David?
Thank you, Chairman. One or 2 points, really. You talked, Chairman, about smaller buses. In fact, as far as we're concerned, we do have smaller buses, but they're smaller buses with 2 and 3 people on, instead of double-deckers with 2 or 3 people on. I think the point that you make about engines running to keep the air conditioning on, I think is atrocious. You only have to walk to the end of this road and you will find 3 and 4 buses belching out filth. If that's so that they can keep the air conditioning running, they need locking up. Also, I don't think the future of buses is going to be electric buses. I think when you look at the developments going on at JCB, it's going to be an alternative, possibly hydrogen-powered engines, because when you look at heavy-duty use of electric power, it isn't as effective as it is, which JCB are proving. The point I was wanting particularly to ask, we have Chinese walls that sit between my division, which bounds Birmingham and Walsall. Because many of the villages on my division developed in the 1960s, there were no services locally at all, as there still aren't many services. People were attracted to go to Aldridge, which is just literally across the valley from where I live. Yet we don't have a Walsall bus which comes into the village. When you look at the number of Walsall buses that there are stacked up in the centre of Aldridge, that could very easily come into the villages and serve those people that need to go into that direction. I think it's very commendable that what we want to do is to take people into our principal shopping centres, into either Burntwood or Lichfield, but the practicality is that within a comparatively short distance they can go elsewhere, and that's where they'll continue to go for doctors, opticians, dentists and all the other services that they have. As at this moment, unless they've got a friendly neighbour, they can't get there.
I'm afraid I can't be specific because I don't actually know where you live. So, in terms of village services are best served by buses that pass through between two more major points to get the number of passengers. Most smaller villages cannot generate the number of passengers needed to make a viable bus service just to run from there to a given point. A bus company now looks to be making between £40 and £50 per hour to cover their costs. Or if it's out all day, £400 a day. That's the sort of numbers they need to look for. We've had coach companies for contracts who basically say if it's not £400, then we're not sending out a garage. It's not worth it. And yes, we've actually enhanced some of the buses out of Lichfield. So I know it's in your area, between Lichfield and Walsall, with the change that's coming up later this month. We managed to look at it in combination with the West Midlands Authority, where they got two buses on a route and we got one bus on a route, and we've managed to combine the two together to give a proper hourly headway and a much better service through there, going through Stonall and so on, down that way towards Aldridge. I'm not sure exactly what the question was, but yeah, I think rural areas best served with a bus service that passes through, because that way you can pick up people all the way and bring them round. And there are good examples of that where it works. If we get some bus service improvement plan funding, it's the sort of thing which we will be looking at, is what can we make? I mean, my ideal answer is it's got to start to be viable or close to viable within 2 years. 2 years is what it takes to build up a bus service to whatever it's going to get to. But it does need to start becoming to that level with the current way that things work.
Graham.
Thank you. In listening to the debate, I was reminded that Transport for London is a strategic area that controls all public transport within the city. I believe Manchester would like to have a Transport for Manchester similar model. And I was wondering, is there any mileage in having a transport authority for North Midlands, which should probably take in, parts of Derbyshire, parts of, the whole of Staffordshire, parts of Shropshire, parts of Cheshire even. I'm not the expert on this. I was just wondering, have the county looked at seeing if this is a viable option, so we can actually say where the buses are going and let people bid for the routes like they do in London, rather than the bus companies decide themselves where they're going to do. Thank you.
Manchester is going down that road now with franchising. That's the bottom line of it. We've had it made very clear to us that the county council are not interested in franchising. It costs a lot to do. It will cost us a lot more money overall. It works well in urban areas where there's lots of passengers in a small area and you can make some money at it. But the West Midlands aren't going down the franchising route. They're still, although they've got their combined authority who look after the local trains and buses, they're not franchising. It's still pretty much a operator-driven logic.
Any further questions? No? Okay, so we've got the recommendation to consider and provide comment on the proposal to complete the process for the creation of the enhanced partnership. Everybody in agreement? Aye. Show of hands, please. Thank you very much. That's carried. And thank you, Jonathan and gents. It's been a pleasure. Yeah, we don't require David Williams anymore. Okay, we'll move straight on to our work programme and just get to the right date. So the next meeting is Thursday the 28th of September at 10 o'clock in the morning. And I won't be here at that meeting, so Peter has kindly is going to be taking over and chairing that for me, aren't you?
Thank you.
Yes, he said. So we've got the Highways Transformation Progress and Performance Update, HS26 Monthly Update, Staffordshire Employment and Skills Strategy. Then it's after that, the next meeting won't be till November the 9th, but we are looking at putting an extra meeting in October, and I think we're looking about the 17th, did you say? Because we've got loads to fit in, and a lot of it is down to the Highways Transformation Programme. So if we can get Darryl, David and the team to accept when they're back off holiday, there will be an extra meeting going in October.
Is that 10 o'clock?
Yeah, I'm hoping so. Could be. We're waiting for the cabinet member to return and accept. Have you got anything else to add, Jonathan?
Yeah, just going back to the September meeting, Chairman, you mentioned about slotting in another item. So we got potentially another couple that had been highlighted at the work programme planning session.
Yeah.
Which is the local nature recovery strategy and the North Staffordshire Air Quality Action Plan.
So we'll see which one's available first then, I think.
Right, potentially they'll both be available, but
obviously because the HS2 is a verbal update, so that's not going to take us a huge amount of time.
Is it not the same cabinet member? Is it not the same cabinet member for nature and air quality? Is it not all down to Taggy?
Simon Tagg, yeah. So we probably
So
potentially will have both of those items on that meeting once Simon Tagg has agreed that he can be here. So September's a busy meeting, ladies and gents. I'll be thinking of you.
On the beach?
Maybe. David?
It's only a thought, but it was very, very good for Jonathan to stand in today. But I thought that we had a cabinet deputy for highways. Wouldn't it have been a good idea for him to have been here? Perhaps we could ask the question.
Jonathan did ask the question and he was unavailable today. An invite did go out to him. So that he couldn't make it.
May I suggest that he looks at future dates in his diary and organise his diary accordingly?
Okay. We haven't got anything in exclusion under the pink paper today, so I'll draw the meeting to a close as Councillor Hutton's ready to go at 11:55. Thank you very much for your attendance today.
Thank you, Chair.